The cold bit through Lyra's thin shift before the jeers did. Stone beneath her bare feet, iron around her wrists. The auction platform rose just high enough that she could see every face in the crowd twisted with disgust, bright with cruel amusement, or worse, empty with indifference. The torches guttered in their sconces, throwing shadows that made the assembled wolves look more beast than human. She kept her chin level, refused to drop her gaze. "Lot 47, the auctioneer droned, his voice carrying the particular boredom of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. "Omega, 22 years. Bloodline, questionable." Laughter rippled through the hall. Someone spat. Lyra's fingers curled into fists, chains rattling. The sound drew more attention, more sneers. A woman in fine silks leaned toward her companion, whisper loud enough to carry. "Isn't that the Ashwood reject? The one whose own mate chose her sister," another voice finished. "At their bonding ceremony, no less." The memory flashed unbidden. Torin's hand reaching past her, the collective gasp of the pack. Her sister Celeste's triumphant smile as Torin claimed her instead, right there in front of the sacred stones, in front of everyone who'd watched Lyra grow up believing she'd be Luna someday. Defective, Torin had called her when she'd demanded an explanation. "Your Omega instincts are dormant, weak. I need a true mate, not a broken one." Her father hadn't even argued when the Pack Council voted to strip her status, cast her out, sold her here. "Do I hear 50 silver?" The auctioneer's voice cracked through her thoughts. Silence. He cleared his throat. 40? A man in the third row made a show of examining his fingernails. Someone coughed. The woman in silk wrinkled her nose as though Lyra smelled of rot. Lyra's heart hammered against her ribs, but she kept her breathing steady, kept her spine straight. She'd learned early that showing fear only made wolves circle closer. 30 silver, then. Surely someone needs a... "Send her to the labor camps," a voice called out. "Save us all the trouble." Approval rumbled through the crowd. The auctioneer's mouth thinned. He glanced toward the guards stationed at the hall's entrance, already calculating, already moving on. Lyra had heard what happened in the labor camps. Omegas went in. Very few came out. She'd sworn she wouldn't beg. Wouldn't give them that satisfaction. But her throat tightened anyway. The auctioneer raised his hand to signal the guards, and every torch in the hall flickered at once. The crowd's murmur died. Heads turned. Even the auctioneer froze, his arm still lifted, as a presence filled the doorway. No, not filled. Commanded. The air itself seemed to contract, pressed thin by the weight of power walking into the room. Lyra couldn't see him clearly at first. Just an outline darker than the shadows, broad-shouldered and tall, moving with the fluid certainty of something apex. The wolves nearest the door shifted back without seeming to realize they were doing it. Instinct. Survival. Then he stepped into the torchlight, and Lyra's breath caught. Alpha King Alaric of the Iron Fang Pack. She'd heard the name whispered with fear and reverence in equal measure. Legendary warrior, ruthless ruler, widower whose grief had turned him to stone. He looked like violence barely leashed, tall enough that most men would have to crane their necks to meet his eyes. Shoulders that spoke of years wielding weapons heavier than most wolves could lift. Dark hair pushed back from a face all brutal angles and sharp edges, high cheekbones, strong jaw, a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. Scars traced pale lines across his throat, disappearing beneath the collar of his black coat. But it was his eyes that made something in Lyra's chest twist. Gray as winter storms, empty as graves. He scanned the crowd with the disinterest of a predator, examining prey it had no intention of eating. Then his gaze landed on Lyra, held. Heat flooded her face, even as ice crystallized in her veins. She couldn't look away, couldn't breathe. His eyes traveled over her slowly, the tangled dark hair falling past her shoulders, the chains The thin shift that hid nothing, the defiant tilt of her chin despite everything. Something flickered in his expression. "Gone too fast to name, Your Majesty." The auctioneer's voice climbed an octave. He bowed so low his forehead nearly struck his knees. We weren't expecting, that is, we're honored." "How much?" Alaric's voice cut through the stammering like a blade through silk. Deep, quiet. The kind of quiet that made people listen harder. The auctioneer blinked rapidly. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty?" For the Omega. Alaric's gaze hadn't left Lyra. "How much?" The hall went silent. Even the torches seemed to stop crackling. Lyra's pulse roared in her ears. This couldn't be happening. Alpha Kings didn't attend common auctions, didn't bid on rejected Omegas with questionable bloodlines and dormant instincts, didn't look at girls on platforms like they were puzzles to solve. The auctioneer swallowed. "The bidding hasn't reached minimum, Your Majesty. Perhaps if you'd prefer, we have other Omegas, stronger ones, in the private collections." I asked how much. Each word fell like a stone into still water. "Not for a sales pitch." Of course. The auctioneer's hands trembled as he shuffled his papers. "Minimum bid is 30 silver, but given her circumstances, I'm certain we could negotiate." 500 gold. The number hung in the air like something physical. Lyra's knees went weak. 500 gold. Enough to buy a small estate. Enough to feed a village for a year. Enough to purchase 10 Omegas of the finest bloodlines. Enough to silence every whisper, every doubt, every cruel laugh in this hall. The woman in silk looked like she might faint. The man who'd suggested the labor camps had gone pale. Even the auctioneer seemed unable to speak for a long moment, mouth working soundlessly. "Sold," he finally managed. "Sold to His Majesty, Alpha King Alaric of Ironfang." Alaric moved before the words finished echoing. He crossed the hall in strides that ate distance, boots ringing against stone. The crowd parted like water before a ship's bow. No one met his eyes. No one dared. He climbed the platform steps. Up close, he was even larger than he'd seemed, radiating heat and power, and something else. Something that made Lyra's skin prickle with awareness. Old blood. Old magic. Old pain. "The chains," he said. The auctioneer scrambled up beside them, keys jangling. "Yes, Your Majesty. At once, I'll just..." Alaric held out one scarred hand. Palm up, waiting. The auctioneer dropped the keys into it like they burned and fled back down the steps. Alaric stepped closer, close enough that Lyra could smell him. Pine and smoke and winter wind. Close enough that she had to tilt her head back to hold his gaze. Those storm-gray eyes studied her face like he was memorizing it, or searching for something he'd lost. "Hold still," he said quietly. He reached for her wrists. His fingers brushed her skin as he fitted the key into the first lock. And lightning cracked through Lyra's bones. Not pain. Worse than pain. Recognition. Her Omega instincts, dormant for so long she'd believed them dead, roared to sudden, vicious life. The bond, the mate bond, screaming at her that this was Alpha, this was hers. This was everything her body had been waiting for since she'd presented. Impossible. Alaric's jaw tightened. His hand stilled, key half-turned. For 3 heartbeats, neither of them moved. Neither of them breathed. His thumb rested against the inside of her wrist where her pulse hammered wild and desperate. He felt it too. She could see it in the way his pupils dilated. The way his nostrils flared slightly, drawing in her scent. The way his grip tightened just a fraction before he forced it loose again. The first shackle opened with a soft click, then the second. The chains fell away, hitting the platform with a crash that made half the crowd flinch. Lyra's wrists were raw where the iron had bit. Red marks, already bruising. Alaric's eyes dropped to them, and something dark crossed his face. "Can you walk?" His voice had gone rougher. "Yes." Her own voice came out steadier than she'd expected. Then she'd earned the right to. "Then come." He turned, black coat swirling, and started down the steps. Lyra's legs trembled but held. She followed, bare feet silent on stone, suddenly aware of every eye tracking her movement. The whisper started before she'd crossed half the hall. "Bought her for 500. After his Luna died, swore he'd never. The curse, it has to be." "She looks just like her, doesn't she? The same. Dead within the month, mark my words." Alaric didn't slow, didn't acknowledge the voices. He walked like he was alone, like the crowd didn't exist, like nothing in this hall deserved his attention now that he'd claimed what he came for. Lyra lifted her chin higher and matched his pace. At the door, he finally paused. Turned back. His gaze swept the room once more, and every wolf in it suddenly found the floor fascinating, "If I hear," he said softly, "that anyone has spoken her name with anything less than respect." He let the sentence hang, unfinished. Didn't need to finish it. The threat in his tone, in his posture, in the cold promise behind his eyes, was crystal clear. Then he looked at Lyra. Really looked at her, and for just a moment, something almost human flickered in those winter-gray depths. "You're mine now," he said. "Not cruel, not kind, simply factual. That means you're safe." He walked into the night. Lyra took one last look at the hall, at the faces that had mocked her, at the platform where she'd stood in chains, at the life she was leaving behind like a skin she'd outgrown. Then she stepped through the door after the Alpha King, into darkness and snow and whatever fate waited in the kingdom of wolves who whispered about curses and dead lunas, and kings who'd forgotten how to love anything but their ghosts. Behind her, someone whispered, "She has no idea what she's walking into." But Lyra heard, and kept walking anyway. The carriage wheels ground against frozen earth for hours. Lyra sat across from Alaric in silence, thick enough to choke on, watching the dark landscape blur past the window. He hadn't spoken since they'd left the auction hall. Hadn't even looked at her. Just stared at something she couldn't see, jaw tight, one hand resting on his knee with fingers curled like he was still holding a weapon. The bond hummed between them. Constant, insistent, a live wire connecting her ribs to his, pulling taut every time the carriage swayed and their knees nearly touched. She pressed her spine against the seat and tried to breathe through it. When the Iron Fang Palace finally emerged from the tree line, Lyra's breath caught for entirely different reasons. It rose from the mountainside like something carved from shadow and stone. Towers that clawed at the sky, walls thick enough to withstand sieges, windows dark as empty eye sockets, reflecting nothing of the moonlight that should have made them glow. Gothic arches and iron gates and gargoyles perched on parapets, like they were waiting for orders to descend. Beautiful, brutal, built to intimidate. The carriage rattled through gates that groaned open like the mouth of some great beast. Lyra caught glimpses of the courtyard as they passed. Training grounds, scarred with old bloodstains, gardens choked with winter-dead roses, wolves in dark uniforms who stopped and stared as the king's carriage rolled past. They looked thin, drawn. Several had bandages visible even in the dim light. The curse. It had to be. The carriage stopped before massive doors carved with scenes of battle. Alaric stepped out without waiting for the driver and strode inside. Lyra climbed down carefully, bare feet finding stone still warm from braziers that burned on either side of the entrance. She followed him into an entrance hall that stole what little warmth she'd gathered. Cold. Everything here was cold. High ceilings lost in shadow. Marble floors polished to black mirrors. Suits of armor standing sentinel along the walls like ghosts of warriors past. And everywhere, portraits. The same woman. Over and over. Beautiful didn't do her justice. She had the kind of face artists spent lifetimes trying to capture. Delicate bone structure, luminous skin, golden hair that fell in perfect waves, pale blue eyes that seemed to follow Lyra as she walked. In one portrait she laughed. In another she gazed toward distant mountains. In the largest, positioned above the grand staircase, she wore a crown of silver and smiled like she knew secrets the world would never learn. Serafina, the late Luna, the ghost Lyra could never become. This way. Alaric's voice echoed off stone. He led her through corridors that twisted deeper into the palace. They passed servants who bowed and scurried away, past more portraits, past rooms with doors firmly shut. The air grew colder the farther they went, and Lyra realized with creeping unease that the shadows here moved wrong. Flickered at the edges of her vision, reached when there was nothing to cast them. Alaric stopped before an iron-bound door and pushed it open. His study. Sparse. Functional. A desk covered in maps and reports. Weapons mounted on walls. A fireplace with embers dying in the grate. And there, above the mantel, another portrait of Serafina. Smaller. More intimate. She wore a simple dress and smiled at whoever had been painting her with an expression so tender it made Lyra's chest ache. Alaric moved behind his desk without looking at the portrait, drew a rolled parchment from a drawer and spread it flat. "Read this." He slid it across the desk. Lyra stepped closer. The contract was written in formal script, dense with legal language she had to parse carefully. But the core of it was simple enough. Brutal in its simplicity, a bonding ceremony, in name only. She would bear the title of Luna, but not the intimacy. She would live in the palace, attend functions, play the role. And once the curse was broken, once whatever dark magic plagued his kingdom was satisfied that he'd taken a new mate, she could leave. He'd provide land, gold. Enough to live comfortably anywhere she chose. She would be free. Why me? The question escaped before she could stop it. Alaric's gaze lifted. Those winter-gray eyes pinned her in place. Does it matter? You spent 500 gold on a rejected Omega. Lyra held his stare. It matters. His jaw worked. For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, the curse requires a bond. You were available, unwanted. His voice dropped. Convenient. The word hit like a slap. But Lyra had been called worse. Had been made to feel smaller by wolves who should have protected her. This at least was honest. And after? She gestured to the contract. After the curse breaks and I leave with my gold and my land, what then? You find another convenient Omega? Something dangerous flickered in his expression. After, I resume being what I was before, a widower, a king, nothing more. A ghost, Lyra said quietly. His hand slammed flat against the desk. Not violent, but final. Sign the contract or don't, but understand I'm offering you more than you had on that platform. More than you'll get anywhere else. So choose. The bond twisted in her chest. Screamed at her that this was wrong, that mates didn't make contracts, that she should refuse and demand what they both felt crackling in the air between them. But Lyra had learned not to trust feelings, had learned that wanting something didn't make it real. She picked up the quill, dipped it in ink. I won't be your ghost, she said, meeting his eyes as she signed her name in swift, clear strokes. I'll play your Luna. I'll help break your curse. But I won't disappear just because you want me to. Alaric stared at her signature, then at her face. Something shifted behind his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or respect, or something more complicated. We'll see, he said. A servant appeared to show Lyra to her chambers. She followed through more twisting corridors, past more portraits, until they reached a door at the end of a long hallway. The room inside was beautiful. Bed draped in dark silks, windows overlooking mountains, a fireplace crackling with fresh flames, and yet, cold. So cold her breath misted. The king requested you be comfortable, the servant murmured, not meeting Lyra's eyes. If you need anything... I'm fine. Lyra managed a smile that felt like glass. Thank you. The servant fled. Lyra locked the door, crossed to the bed, sat on the edge and finally let herself shake. Let the terror and exhaustion and impossible bond crash over her in waves that stole her breath. She'd been bought, contracted, brought to a cursed palace to play replacement for a dead woman whose face watched from every wall. The fire guttered, went out. Lyra's head snapped up. The temperature plummeted. Her breath clouded thick now, frost creeping across the windows in patterns like clutching fingers. The shadows in the corners deepened, grew solid. And from those shadows, she came, Serafina. But not the woman from the portraits. This version flickered translucent and wrong, her beautiful face twisted with rage. Her golden hair floated as though underwater. Her pale blue eyes burned with something that made every instinct in Lyra scream to run. The ghost drifted closer. Her mouth moved. No sound came out, but Lyra heard the words anyway. Inside her skull, cold and sharp as knives. Mine. He's mine. You will never be enough. Never be me. Leave before I make you leave. Lyra's back hit the headboard, her hands fisted in the silk coverlet. Terror locked her throat. Serafina's form expanded, filling the room, and her whisper became a shriek. Leave. The windows exploded inward. Glass rained down. Lyra threw up her arms, felt shards bite her skin, felt the temperature drop so low her tears froze on her cheeks. Then, nothing. The ghost vanished. The cold receded. The shadows retreated to their corners like nothing had happened. Lyra sat trembling in a room full of broken glass and her own blood, staring at the space where a dead Luna had promised her suffering. And she understood, finally, what she'd signed her name to. Lyra didn't tell anyone about the ghost. Morning came with pale sunlight filtering through shattered windows. She wrapped her bleeding hands in strips torn from the bedsheet and dressed in the simple gown someone had left folded on a chair. Dark blue wool. Modest. It fit well enough. The servant who arrived with breakfast found her sweeping glass into a corner with her bare hands. My lady. The girl dropped the tray. What happened? Should I fetch the healer? I'm fine. Lyra smiled through the lie. Clumsy. I knocked into the window last night. The servant's eyes went wide, knowing. But she only nodded and helped clean the rest, casting nervous glances at the corners where shadows still clung too thick. Lyra ate quickly and escaped into the corridors before anyone could ask more questions. The palace felt different in daylight, still cold, still oppressive, but she could see the bones of it now, the beauty beneath the decay. She wandered through halls where dust gathered on forgotten furniture, past training rooms and council chambers and a conservatory where dead plants stood in neat rows like grave markers, and everywhere, the pack members. But they weren't united. She saw it in the way they clustered, some wearing black armbands, faces set in permanent mourning, others watching them with barely concealed frustration, arguments breaking out in whispers that cut off when she passed. A kingdom divided between those who wanted their king to move on and those who would worship Serafina's memory forever. In the servants' quarters, Lyra found a young woman crying over a basket of laundry. No one else stopped. No one else seemed to care. Lyra knelt beside her. What's wrong? The woman startled. My lady, I'm fine. I shouldn't. Please. Lyra touched her hand gently. Tell me. The story spilled out. A brother in the infirmary, sick with the wasting illness that had plagued the pack since the Luna died. The healers couldn't stop it. Said it was the curse. Said only a true bond could break it. Lyra's Omega instinct stirred. Weak, still dormant mostly, but there. She let them rise. Let them reach for the woman's pain and wrap around it like a blanket. He'll survive, Lyra said softly. Not a promise. a certainty she felt in her bones. The curse will break, soon. The woman stared at her, then slowly smiled through her tears. Thank you, my lady. Word spread faster than fire. By midday, Lyra had found 3 more sick pack members, sat with them. Let her presence ease their trembling. It wasn't healing, but it was something. Something they hadn't felt in 2 years. She was crossing the courtyard when she heard it, the crack of wood against wood, grunts of effort, the distinctive sound of combat. The training ground stretched behind the east wing, a wide expanse of packed earth surrounded by weapon racks and practice dummies. A dozen wolves sparred in pairs, but they all stopped when their king stepped into the ring. Alaric had stripped to the waist despite the cold. Scars covered him, claw marks across his ribs, a puckered wound on his shoulder, another tracing his spine. Maps of violence written on skin. He moved like water and lightning combined, staff spinning in his hands as he faced 3 opponents at once. They attacked in coordination. He dismantled them with brutal efficiency. Lyra watched from the shadows. Couldn't look away. This was power in its rawest form, not the cold control he wore like armor, but something primal, dangerous. His muscles coiled and released. Sweat gleamed on his skin. When he struck, the impact echoed. But it was his face that made her chest tighten. Empty, mechanical, like he was punishing himself with every movement. He dropped the last opponent and stood breathing hard, staring at nothing. Again, he said. Your Majesty. One of the wolves hesitated. Perhaps a rest. Again. They came at him. He met them. And Lyra saw it now, the way he left himself open, the way he took hits he could have avoided, the way pain flickered across his features for just a moment before the emptiness returned. He wasn't training. He was seeking penance. That night, Lyra couldn't sleep. The ghost's words circled her thoughts like vultures. The broken windows had been replaced, but the cold remained. She wrapped herself in a robe and slipped into the corridors, seeking anything to distract from the dread coiling in her stomach. She found the library by accident. A vast room lined floor to ceiling with books, warmed by a fire someone had left burning. And there, in a chair by the flames, sat Alaric. He looked up as she entered. Didn't seem surprised. Can't sleep? His voice was rough. Tired. No. Lyra moved closer. You? Haven't slept well in 2 years. He gestured to the chair across from him. Sit if you want. She sat. They stared at the fire in silence that felt almost comfortable. Almost. I saw you today, Lyra said finally, at the training grounds. His jaw tightened. And? You fight like you're trying to die. The words hung between them. Alaric's hands tightened on the chair arms. For a long moment he didn't respond. Then, maybe I am. He met her eyes. Maybe I have been. For 2 years. Why? Because I failed her. Simple. Devastating. I was supposed to protect her. I promised her she'd be safe. And I let assassins slip past my guard. Let them reach her chambers. Let them... His voice cracked. Went quiet. Lyra's throat closed. It wasn't your fault. Wasn't it? He leaned forward, firelight carving shadows across his face. I'm the king. The Alpha. Protection is what I do. And I failed. So yes, maybe I deserve to hurt. Maybe that's all I deserve now. That's not survival, Lyra said softly. That's just slow death. He looked at her. Really looked. And you'd know. I stood on that platform ready to be sent to labor camps where I'd work until my body gave out. She held his gaze. I know what it looks like to give up without actually dying, and I know what it takes to choose differently. What does it take? Deciding you're worth saving. She paused. Even when no one else thinks so. Something shifted in his expression. Something almost like recognition. He opened his mouth to respond. and reached across the space between them without seeming to realize it. His hand covered hers where it rested on the chair arm. The bond exploded. Fire raced up Lyra's arm, through her chest, igniting every nerve. She gasped. Alaric went rigid, his hand tightening on hers as the connection roared to life between them, primal, undeniable, screaming that this was right, that they were meant to fit together like this, their eyes locked, his pupils dilated. She could feel his pulse hammering in rhythm with hers. He jerked his hand back like she'd burned him. "You should go." His voice came out strangled. "Now." Lyra fled. She made it to her chambers, shut the door, pressed her back against it, heart racing, skin still singing from that single touch. The temperature dropped. "No," Lyra whispered. "Not again." But Serafina came anyway, angrier this time, more solid. Her translucent form filled the room, and furniture began to shake. The mirror cracked. Bedposts splintered. The ghost's mouth opened in a soundless shriek, and the very walls seemed to scream with her. Lyra stumbled backward. Glass from the new windows exploded inward. The wardrobe toppled. Something struck her shoulder. She cried out, fell, and the ghost descended, freezing hands reaching for her throat. The door burst open. Alaric filled the doorway, power radiating off him in waves. His eyes found the ghost, found Lyra on the floor. "Enough," he commanded. The ghost turned, hissed, rushed at him. He didn't flinch. "Serafina, stop." The ghost froze, flickered. Her form wavered between solid and smoke. Alaric crossed to Lyra, pulled her to her feet, stepped between her and the spirit. "I won't let anything hurt you," he said quietly, firmly. "Not even her." The ghost shrieked once more, fury and heartbreak combined. Then she vanished, leaving only cold and wreckage behind. Alaric turned to Lyra. His hands settled on her shoulders, checking for injuries, and his touch was gentle in a way that made her want to weep. "You're staying in different chambers tonight," he said, "near mine, where I can hear if—" He stopped, drew a breath. "You're not facing this alone anymore." Lyra nodded, couldn't speak past the knot in her throat, because somehow, impossibly, the broken Alpha King had just chosen to protect her, even from his own grief. They moved Lyra to chambers 3 doors from Alaric's. Smaller, warmer. Windows that faced east where morning light could chase away shadows. She didn't sleep, just lay staring at the ceiling, feeling the ghost's phantom hands around her throat, hearing Alaric's voice. "I won't let anything hurt you." Morning came too fast. The bonding ceremony was set for sunset. Servants descended on Lyra like a flock of nervous birds, bathing her, dressing her, weaving her dark hair into intricate braids threaded with silver. The gown they brought made her breath catch, white silk that flowed like water, cut to emphasize the curve of her waist, the line of her throat. Beautiful. Exactly what a Luna should wear. It felt like a costume for a play she hadn't rehearsed. The great hall had been transformed. Candles everywhere, their flames reflected in polished marble. The pack assembled in their finest clothes, faces ranging from curious to hostile. At the front, Lady Marin stood draped in mourning black, her resemblance to Serafina so striking it made Lyra's stomach clench. Same golden hair, same delicate features. But where Serafina had been warmth, Marin was ice. Alaric waited at the altar in formal black and silver, jaw tight, eyes distant. He looked like a man walking to his execution. The ceremony began, ancient words in the old tongue. Lyra repeated them without understanding, her voice steady even as her hands shook. When Alaric took her wrist to mark the bond, his touch sent electricity racing up her arm. His eyes snapped to hers, startled, heated, before he shuttered them again. The officiant brought forth the Luna's crown, silver worked into the shape of crescent moons, delicate and deadly beautiful. Alaric lifted it with both hands, hesitated. The hall held its breath, Then he placed it on Lyra's head, and something in his expression cracked. Just for a moment. The emptiness giving way to something raw and real and terrified. Their eyes locked. The bond thrummed between them, no longer ignorable. "I present Luna Lyra of Ironfang," the officiant announced. Half the pack knelt. The other half remained standing. Lady Marin stepped forward. "I object." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Alaric's hand moved to the blade at his hip. "On what grounds?" "She's not one of us." Marin's voice carried clear and cold. "A rejected Omega with no bloodline, no training, no right to wear my sister's crown." "That crown belongs to whoever I choose," Alaric said quietly, dangerously. "Does it?" Marin smiled without warmth. "Or does it belong to the pack? We have a voice too, Your Majesty. And many of us believe this girl is an insult to Seraphina's memory." Murmurs of agreement. Lyra felt their judgment like physical weight, but she lifted her chin and met Marin's gaze. "I'm not trying to replace her," Lyra said. "I'm trying to help save you. We don't need saving by you." "Your sick say different." Lyra stepped forward. "I've sat with them, felt their pain, and I'll keep doing it whether you approve or not." Marin's eyes narrowed, but she stepped back. For now. The next days blurred together. Lyra spent them in the infirmary, sitting with the cursed. Her Omega instincts grew stronger each time. Not healing exactly, but easing. Taking the edge off their suffering. Some began to improve. Word spread. She found Alaric in the library late one night, bottle of whiskey half empty beside him. He didn't look up when she entered. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked softly. "Never can." His words slurred slightly. "Too many ghosts." Lyra sat across from him. Waited. "It was supposed to be me," he said suddenly. "The poison. The assassins wanted me dead." "But Seraphina," his voice cracked. "She drank from my cup, didn't know it was meant for me, died in my arms while I screamed for healers who couldn't save her." Horror closed Lyra's throat. "Alaric, I don't deserve to be happy." He looked at her with eyes full of broken glass. "Don't deserve to feel anything but this. Don't deserve you." "Then don't be happy," Lyra said. She moved to kneel beside his chair, took his hand. "But don't be dead either. Your pack needs you alive. I need—" She stopped, swallowed. "I need you to try." His thumb traced over her knuckles, back and forth, the touch feather-light and devastating. "You're not what I expected," he whispered. "Good." He leaned forward. She should have pulled back, should have remembered the contract, the boundaries, the careful distance they'd agreed to maintain. But when his lips brushed hers, tentative, questioning, she leaned in instead. The kiss was gentle, careful. Nothing like the fire of the bond demanding completion. This was comfort, connection. Two broken people reaching for something whole. When they pulled apart, his eyes were wide. "Terrified. I can't. I know." They sat in silence, his hand still holding hers. Something fragile and precious suspended between them. A crash shattered the quiet. Alaric was on his feet instantly, blade drawn. Lyra stumbled up as footsteps pounded in the corridor. Shouts. The clash of steel. They burst into the hallway. A figure in black fled toward the east wing, guards giving chase. Another lay crumpled near Lyra's old chambers, blood pooling beneath him. Alaric moved like death itself. He caught the fleeing assassin in 3 strides, slammed him against the wall hard enough to crack stone. His blade found the man's throat. "Who sent you?" The assassin smiled through broken teeth. "She's already dead. Just doesn't know it yet." Alaric's blade moved. Quick, final. The body dropped. He turned to Lyra, chest heaving, eyes wild. Blood spattered his shirt. He crossed to her in 2 strides, hands framing her face, checking for injuries with desperate intensity. "You're staying with me," he said. "Not a request. In my chambers, where I can protect you." Lyra nodded. Couldn't speak past the terror still choking her. Because someone wanted her dead, and the broken Alpha King had just killed to keep her alive. Lyra's new chambers adjoined Alaric's through a connecting door left deliberately unlocked. She heard him pacing that first night, back and forth, the sound of a wolf caged by his own guilt. By morning, Cale had answers. The War Council convened in the strategy room, maps spread across tables, advisors arguing in tight clusters. Lyra slipped in quietly, intending to observe from the shadows. "The assassin bore shadow paw marks," Cale announced, dropping a bloodied knife on the table. "They want us weakened. The curse keeps our forces depleted. A true Luna bond threatens that." "Then we strike first," one general growled. "Before they—" "No." Alaric's voice cut through the noise. His eyes found Lyra standing by the door. "What are you doing here?" Every head turned. Lady Marin's lips curved with disdain. "I'm your Luna," Lyra said evenly. "This concerns me too." "This is war strategy, girl," Marin snapped. "Not embroidery circles." "Then teach me." Lyra moved to the table, studied the maps. "The Shadowpaw territory borders the Silvercrest Pack here. They've remained neutral in territorial disputes for years. What if we offered alliance? Put pressure on two fronts?" Silence. Then Cale grinned. "That could work." Alaric's gaze lingered on her face. Something like pride flickered there. "Draw up terms. Send envoys to Silvercrest." Marin's jaw tightened, but she said nothing. After the council dispersed, Alaric caught Lyra's arm. "Training grounds. 1 hour." He was waiting when she arrived, wooden practice staff in each hand. He tossed one to her. She caught it clumsily. "If someone comes for you again," he said, "you need to survive long enough for me to reach you." The lessons were brutal. He showed no mercy, pushing her until sweat soaked her training clothes and her arms shook. But he was patient too, adjusting her grip, demonstrating footwork, his hands on her waist, repositioning her stance, lingering just a heartbeat too long. The bond hummed constantly now. Electric, insistent. "Again," he said after she'd landed a hit to his ribs. "You're hurt." "I've had worse." But his breathing had changed, shallow. Quick. Not from exertion. Their eyes locked. He stepped closer. The staff fell from her nerveless fingers. "Lyra." His voice was rough gravel. "The ritual," Kyle interrupted, appearing at the training ground entrance. "The full moon is tomorrow night. If we're going to break the curse before war comes—" Alaric stepped back. The moment shattered. "Prepare everything." The moon ritual required an altar in the sacred grove, silver blessed by moonlight, and words older than the kingdom itself. But most crucially, complete vulnerability between mates. Lyra stood in the grove as moonlight painted everything silver. Alaric faced her across the altar, stripped to the waist, ancient markings painted across his chest in ash and blood. She wore only thin white silk that left nothing hidden. "This will complete the bond," the elder priestess warned. "Your souls will be bound. Forever. There's no undoing it." Alaric's eyes found Lyra's. A question in them. She nodded. They knelt together. The priestess began chanting. Lyra placed her hands over Alaric's heart. His covered hers. The bond ignited. Not gentle this time, but consuming. Fire racing through her veins. She gasped. "Open yourself to him," the priestess commanded. "Let him see everything." Lyra closed her eyes, lowered every wall, let Alaric feel her rejection, her pain, her desperate hope that maybe, she could be enough. That maybe broken pieces could still fit together into something whole. His emotions crashed into her in return. Grief like drowning, guilt sharp as knives, and beneath it all, want, need. The terrifying realization that he was falling for her despite every promise he'd made to himself. The light around them intensified. The curse trembled, ready to break, and Seraphina materialized. Solid this time, real. Her beautiful face twisted with rage and heartbreak. She reached for the altar, frost spreading from her fingertips, trying to shatter the connection. "Stop!" Lyra shouted. She stood, still holding Alaric's hands. "He loved you, I know he did. But you're gone." The ghost screamed soundlessly. "And I'm here." Lyra's voice softened. "I'm alive. And he deserves to be alive too. So let him go. Please." Seraphina's form flickered. For just a moment the rage faded. Her eyes met Alaric's, sad, resigned, almost tender. Then she smiled, peaceful, and dissolved into light. The curse shattered like glass. Power exploded outward in waves that knocked the priestess back. Lyra and Alaric crashed together, the bond completing with devastating finality. She felt his soul twine with hers, permanent and unbreakable. Then a scout burst into the grove, chest heaving. "Your Majesty, the Shadowpaw army, they're marching, 3,000 strong. They'll reach our borders by dawn." Alaric's arms tightened around Lyra, his newly bonded mate, his Luna. "Then we meet them," he said, steel in his voice, "and we show them what happens when you threaten what's mine." The war room filled before dawn. Maps marked with enemy positions. Weapons distributed. Alaric commanded with cold precision, but Lyra felt his fear through the bond. Not for himself, but for her. Kale spread intelligence reports across the table. They knew our patrol routes, guard rotations, weak points in the eastern wall. He looked up, face grim. Someone's been feeding them information for weeks. "Impossible," one general protested. "No one here would—" "I would." Lady Marin stepped forward, chin high. "I did." The room erupted. Alaric's hand slammed down, silencing them. "Why?" "Because you replaced her." Marin's voice shook with fury. "Put that girl in my sister's crown, in her chambers, in her place. Seraphina deserved better than to be forgotten." "She wasn't forgotten," Alaric said quietly, dangerously. "But she's gone, and you've just condemned hundreds to die for your grief." "Guards," Kale barked, "take her." They dragged Marin away, screaming. Lyra watched, chest tight. Love twisted into poison, grief weaponized. "We fortify the eastern wall," Alaric continued, voice steady despite the betrayal. "Archers on the ramparts, infantry in 3 lines. They want a siege. We'll give them hell instead." The Shadowpaw army arrived with the sunrise, 3,000 strong, their alpha at the front, massive, scarred, radiating brutal confidence. His voice carried across the field. "Send out the false Luna. Her death ends this." Alaric's growl vibrated through the bond. Lyra touched his arm. "I'm not hiding." "Like hell you're not. I'm your mate now, your equal." She held his gaze. "And I can help." The battle began with arrow volleys that darkened the sky. Then the armies crashed together, tooth and claw and steel. Lyra watched from the ramparts, healers positioned behind her, every instinct screaming to run toward Alaric, fighting in the center of the chaos. She felt his pain through the bond, every hit, every near miss. It was agony. The eastern wall buckled. Shadowpaw forces poured through, headed straight for the palace, for her. "My lady, we need to evacuate." A guard reached for her arm. Lyra's omega power exploded outward. She didn't know she could do this, didn't know her instincts could be weaponized. But desperation and the completed bond unlocked something primal. A wave of pure, overwhelming calm radiated from her in a 50-foot sphere. The charging Shadowpaw wolves stumbled, slowed. Their aggression drained like water through cracks. Confusion replaced rage. Several dropped their weapons. swaying, suddenly docile. Iron Fang forces seized the advantage, cut them down, pushed them back. Lyra gasped, the power draining her, but she held it as more enemies pushed through, held it until her nose bled and her vision blurred. On the field, Alaric fought like a force of nature. Blood and fury. He carved through enemies toward the Shadowpaw Alpha. Their clash shook the ground. Then Lyra saw it, the archer on the rampart. Arrow knocked, poison gleaming on the tip, aimed at her heart. She opened her mouth to scream. Alaric materialized in front of her. The arrow took him in the chest. He staggered, eyes going wide with shock. The poison worked fast. Black veins spreading from the wound. No! Lyra caught him as he fell. His weight pulled them both down. No, no, no. Lyra! His hand found her face, trembling. Run! I'm not leaving you, you stubborn fool. Tears blurred her vision. Healers! Someone help him! His thumb brushed her cheekbone. I love you, he whispered. Wanted to say it, before... You don't get to die. She pressed her hands to the wound, felt his blood hot and slick. I love you. Do you hear me? You don't get to leave me now. His eyes focused on her face, really seeing her. A smile ghosted across his lips. I loved a ghost. His voice faded. Until you taught me to live again. Then live. She sobbed. Please, Alaric, please. Healers swarmed them, dragged him inside. Lyra followed, hands covered in his blood, feeling his heartbeat growing weaker through the bond. If he died, part of her would die too. That's what mate bonds meant. She couldn't lose him. Not now, not after finally finding him. The healers worked for hours. Lyra refused to leave, holding his hand, pouring every ounce of her Omega power into him. Soothing, strengthening, willing him to fight. Outside, the battle turned. The Shadowpaw forces, seeing their tactical advantage lost and their enemies fighting with renewed desperation, began to retreat. The Alpha escaped in the chaos, swearing vengeance, but Lyra didn't care, only watched Alaric's chest rise and fall. Shallow. Too shallow. The poison's rare, the head healer said quietly. We've slowed it, but what? His body has to fight it. We've done all we can. So Lyra held his hand, and prayed, and pushed everything she had through the bond, all her strength, all her will, all her desperate love. At midnight, his eyes opened. Lyra? His voice was ruined, weak, but alive. She collapsed against his chest, sobbing. You came back, you stubborn, stupid... His hand tangled in her hair. You saved me. Again. We saved each other. Outside, the kingdom began to rebuild, counted their dead, tended their wounded. The Shadowpaw Alpha had escaped, the threat not ended but pushed back. But in that moment, Lyra didn't care about any of it. Only held her mate and felt his heartbeat steady beneath her palm. He'd survived. They both had, and somehow that was enough. Alaric healed slowly. 3 days before he could sit without pain lancing through his chest. A week before he could walk unaided. Lyra never left his side. She fed him broth when his hands shook too badly to hold the spoon. Changed his bandages with gentle efficiency. Slept in a chair beside his bed, waking at every sound, every shift of his breathing. You should rest, he said one morning, voice still rough. In your own chambers. No. She met his eyes. We're bonded now. Where you are, I am. Something in his expression softened, cracked open. On the 8th day, he finally spoke the words that had been building behind his teeth. I blamed myself for so long. His gaze fixed on the ceiling. Thought if I could just punish myself enough, maybe it would balance the scales. Maybe I'd deserve to keep breathing. Lyra's hand found his. Squeezed. But you... His voice broke. You made me want to live again, made me remember what that felt like. I know about punishment, she said quietly. Spent years believing I deserved my rejection, that being broken was my fault. She turned to face him fully. We were both wrong. We deserved to heal, together. He pulled her closer. Their foreheads touched. The bond hummed between them, warm and certain. I love you, he whispered. Completely. No ghosts, no contracts, just you. I love you too. The kiss was different this time, not tentative, not born of comfort or fear. This was claiming, promise. His hand cupped her face, thumb tracing her cheekbone as his mouth moved against hers with growing heat. She climbed into the bed beside him, careful of his healing wound. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her flush against him. The bond ignited, not just emotional now, but physical, a need that had been building since that first electric touch. Are you sure? His voice was gravel and want. Your wound is healed enough. He rolled them carefully, settling her beneath him. And I need you, all of you. What followed was transformation, bodies moving together with desperate tenderness, whispered words and gasping breaths. The bond completing in ways the ritual hadn't touched. Physical, primal, two souls becoming one in the most ancient way. When they finally lay tangled together, sweat-slicked and trembling, Lyra felt different, whole, like every broken piece had finally found where it belonged. Mine, Alaric murmured against her throat. My mate, my Luna, my love. Yours, she agreed. Always. The pack ceremony came 2 weeks later. This time, when Lyra stood before them in Luna's crown, no one remained standing. Every wolf knelt. Even those who doubted bowed their heads in respect. She'd earned it. In battle. In compassion. In the way she'd brought their king back from the edge of death. Lady Marin watched from her cell, face unreadable. Lyra's first act as accepted Luna was reform. She abolished the practice of auctioning rejected omegas, established protections, created safe houses in every territory for those cast out by their packs. You're changing the world, Alaric said, watching her work late into the night over legislation documents. I'm changing our world, she corrected, so no one else has to stand on that platform feeling worthless. He kissed her temple, pride and love flooding through the bond. A month after the battle, Lyra woke feeling wrong, nauseous, dizzy. The healers confirmed it that afternoon, pregnant. She stood in their chambers, hand pressed to her still flat stomach, terror and joy warring in her chest. A child. Their child. The future she'd never let herself imagine. Alaric found her there at sunset. One look at her face and he knew. Lyra, I'm pregnant. The words came out small. Scared. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropped to his knees before her, pressed his forehead to her stomach with a reverence that made her throat close. A miracle, he breathed. You're a miracle. She tangled her fingers in his hair. Let the tears fall. Happy ones this time. They told the pack the next morning. Celebration erupted. Hope, tangible and bright, filled the kingdom for the first time in years. But that afternoon, the messenger arrived. Kale brought him to the war room. A young wolf, exhausted and terrified. Speak, Alaric commanded. The Shadowpaw Alpha has allied with the Blood Moon Pack and the Nightfang clan. The messenger's voice shook. They're raising an army. 5,000 strong. Maybe more. Silence fell like a blade. And they've hired a dark sorcerer, the messenger continued. One who claims he can bind your unborn child to a curse. Use its power to destroy Ironfang from within. Lyra's hand flew to her stomach. Alaric's arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her against him, protective and fierce. When? Kale asked. They march within the month. Alaric's jaw set. Then we have a month to prepare. He looked at Lyra, at the fierce determination in her eyes that matched his own. "We've survived worse. We'll survive this too." She nodded. Because they would. They had to. For their pack. For their future. For the child growing inside her who deserved to be born into a world of peace, not war. "Together," she said. "Always," he agreed. But as the messenger left and the war council began planning, Lyra felt the shadow of the coming storm. Darker than anything they'd faced. More dangerous than any curse. And she knew the real battle was just beginning. The sorcerer came at dawn. Lyra woke to screaming, not from the guards, from her own body. Pain lanced through her stomach where the baby grew. She gasped, doubling over, feeling dark magic trying to sink claws into her child's developing soul. Alaric was at her side instantly. "What's happening? The curse." She could barely speak. "He's already starting." The palace shuddered. Shadows poured through windows like living smoke. In the courtyard below, the Shadowpaw army assembled, 5,000 strong, the Alpha at their head. Beside him, a figure in black robes, hands raised, chanting words that made the air itself recoil. "He's trying to bind the child now," Kale burst in. "Before it's born, before we can protect it." Alaric's eyes blazed gold, Alpha fury rising. "Then we end this. Today." They armed themselves. Lyra refused the offer to hide in the safe room. "My child. My fight." On the ramparts, Lady Marin waited in chains. "I know the sorcerer's weaknesses," she said quietly. "Let me help. Not for forgiveness, but because Seraphina would have wanted the child protected." Alaric studied her, then nodded to the guards. "Release her." The battle erupted with savage intensity. Ironfang forces met Shadowpaw head-on. Steel rang. Wolves tore into each other. Blood painted snow crimson. Alaric cut through enemies like death incarnate, fighting toward the Shadowpaw Alpha. Lyra felt his rage through the bond. Protective, primal, absolute. She faced the sorcerer across the battlefield. He smiled, ancient and cruel, and thrust his hands forward. Dark magic slammed into her. She screamed, feeling it reach for her womb, for the precious life inside. "No!" She unleashed her Omega power. But this time, it wasn't calm she projected. It was rage, maternal fury given form. The wave hit the sorcerer, disrupting his concentration. Lady Marin appeared at Lyra's side. "His focus is split. Press him now." Together they advanced, Marin's knowledge and Lyra's power combining. The sorcerer snarled, throwing curse after curse. But for every attack, they had a counter. Across the field, Alaric and the Shadowpaw Alpha collided. Titans clashing. The Alpha was massive, experienced, brutal. But Alaric fought with everything. For his mate, for his child, for his kingdom. Their battle shook the ground. Claw and fang, each blow devastating. Lyra felt Alaric's pain through the bond. Felt him taking damage. She wanted to go to him, but the sorcerer attacked again, and she had to focus. "The amulet!" Marin shouted. "Around his neck, that's the source." Lyra saw it, dark crystal pulsing with stolen life. She gathered every ounce of power, felt the bond strengthen her, felt Alaric's love flood through the connection, giving her strength. She struck. Pure Omega power, refined by love and desperation, hit the amulet dead center. It shattered. The sorcerer screamed as the backlash consumed him. His body ignited with black fire and collapsed to ash. The dark magic vanished. The curse attempting to form around her child evaporated like morning mist. On the battlefield, Alaric drove his blade through the Shadowpaw Alpha's chest. The massive wolf fell. His army, seeing their leaders destroyed, threw down weapons. "We surrender!" someone shouted. "We surrender!" Silence fell, broken only by ragged breathing and the moans of wounded. Alaric crossed the battlefield to Lyra, pulled her into his arms, pressed his hand to her stomach where their child rested safe now. Protected. "It's over," he whispered. "You're both safe." She collapsed against him, exhausted and victorious. Lady Marin knelt before them. "I don't ask forgiveness, but I hope, perhaps, Serafina can rest now, knowing the kingdom survives." Alaric helped her stand. "You're free, with our thanks." 6 months later, Lyra's screams filled the palace for different reasons. Labor was agony and miracle combined. Alaric held her hand through every contraction, whispering encouragement, sharing her pain through the bond. Then, a baby's cry, strong and furious. "A girl," the healer announced. Before Lyra could catch her breath, another contraction hit. Minutes later, a second cry joined the first, a boy, twins. Perfect and healthy. The girl with Alaric's storm-gray eyes, the boy with Lyra's dark hair. Alaric held them both, tears streaming unashamed down his face. "They're perfect. You're perfect." The kingdom celebrated for 3 days straight. On the 4th morning, Alaric carried both babies to the balcony. Lyra joined him there, still weak but glowing with joy. Below, their pack assembled. Thousands of wolves, all looking up with love and loyalty. Alaric handed her their daughter, kept their son cradled in one arm. His other arm wrapped around Lyra's waist, pulling her close. "You were never the rejected Omega," he said softly, "just for her. You were always my queen." She leaned into him, watching their kingdom stretch out before them. Fields recovering from war, walls being rebuilt, people healing, thriving. "I had one rule," she thought. "Never beg. I never had to. Because he saw me. And I saw him. And together, we became whole. The rejected Omega girl became the most powerful Luna in history, and the broken Alpha King learned to love again." Below, the pack howled their approval. Above, the sun broke through clouds, and on that balcony, a family stood together, forged through pain, tempered by love, unbreakable, forever claimed, forever whole, forever home.